Hello and welcome back to Scripture Revisited. Today's episode is called Measuring Growth. We know that growth is a natural part of life, and I would even say that is what allows us to characterize and identify life. From the moment that we are born to the time in our lives right now, we see that we have gone from being a child to a toddler to an adolescent to a teenager to now a young adult to then an adult to then a senior citizen. We see this progression over the years. When we plant a flower, as we water it, we make sure the soil is all good, that it receives proper sunlight. We see week by week that the flower begins to bloom, sprout, it grows. Think back to when we were like 8 or 9 years old, and we were always eager every few weeks to go ahead, run up against the wall, press our back up against it, stand up straight, take out a marker, and just mark the top of our head up against the wall. We were eager to measure our height. Why? Because we knew that the older we grow, the taller we get. We had this passion, we had this just happiness from seeing results, from seeing progress. And we would look at the line being just a little bit taller than the last line from a few months ago, and we would be, yes, I grew taller. I grew. Now, there are two categories of growth, natural and manual. Natural growth consists of age. There's nothing that we can do to stop this. We will always get older. Hair, whether we grow hair longer or as age goes on and it grows thinner, there's nothing that we could do to delay that. Wrinkles, there is nothing that we can do manually to stop wrinkles. It's just going to happen on its own. It's natural. Now, yes, I know that there are transplants and surgeries and all of this, but I really am a firm believer in gravity, meaning that whatever we put up and tie up against our face or our scalp, over time, it's all going to come back down. Gravity is going to bring it down. So the more that we put up, the more is going to be dragged down. Now, there's also manual growth. This is growth that requires some effort from ourselves. It's not just going to happen on our own. Think back to natural. If we wake up at the age of 50, we don't suddenly know everything, but this is where we have manual growth. We put in the effort through academics and school. We have homework. We have tests and we get grades. This requires input from ourselves. This is a lot like the input that we need through sanctification. Philippians 1, chapter 1, verses 12 through 13. I just want to read it and we could dissect it a little bit now that we know the two different types of growth. And when I read this verse, I just want you to think about which one this sounds like. Natural, it's going to happen all on its own, or manual, I got to do something about it. So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but how much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Now, right off the bat, we're reading it and we hear work out your salvation. We're like, oh, well, that's manual. And then we read the next verse. It says, for it is God who is at work in you. And now we think, well, it kind of sounds natural. I don't get it. I'm working and he's working in me. So then why don't I just, cut back? Because Christianity, I think very often is misinterpreted. It is depicted as a motorcycle that Jesus is driving, he is steering, and there's a sidecar attached to it, and we have the cool little hat and those glasses, and we're just sitting in the sidecar, and every couple of miles we look over at Jesus, he looks at us and we give him a thumbs up like, yeah, you're doing it. Christianity is not a motorcycle with a sidecar. That is not how we get to heaven. I would argue that our walk with God is a lot more similar to a two-person bicycle. If you've ever had the privilege of driving a two-person bicycle, you almost argue where you want to be. Because if you're in the back, well, your only responsibility is paddling. You're just the support. And if you're in the front, well, Now you're responsible for steering and also have to paddle. And it's awkward, it's weird, but it requires two people. It's not just any one person. Whoever's in the front, it doesn't matter how accurately he steers. If the person in the back isn't paddling, they're not going anywhere. Conversely, if the person in the back is paddling as hard as he can, but the person in the front isn't and isn't steering, they're not going anywhere. In order for God to work within me, there must be agreement on the destination. That way we can paddle together in unison. That way we can steer with the correct directions, that we can shift the proper gears. Sometimes life requires more effort, sometimes a little bit less. In certain cases, I have to use one attitude and vocabulary. In another one, I have to use different diction to attach it to the audience. And that's the only way to make real progress. Okay, well now I've defined that I have to put in the effort, but how can I see my spiritual height, I could still bring out a tape measure and I could measure myself and see, okay, I'm almost 6 foot, nice. And all that 5 years later, I'm still almost 6 foot, nice. I know my physical height. How do I see my spiritual growth? Well, just like my height on the wall, I got to track it over the years. In order for progress to be noticed, progress has to be noted. I love journaling. I know a lot of people that love journaling. If you don't love it, you haven't tried it well enough. I promise you, if you love God, you love consuming His word, and you keep it in your heart, in your mind, on your soul, you're going to want to journal. So try it, because through a journal, we get to collect thoughts. We get to store memories. We can speak freely. Speaking freely is actually a lot more difficult than we would assume, because even in the journal that I write in that no one else reads, I want to lie. Well, yeah, this person was just really upset with me, probably because I'm way cooler than them and more experienced and knowledgeable. And then God is nodding his head and he's just convicting my heart. He's like, Lucas, that is not what happened. And I'm like, whoa, wait, you're right. That isn't what happened. We want to lie to everyone around us. We want to lie in the journals that no one reads. So this is a wonderful exercise that helps us be disciplined to write everything down, how it is, what happened, and how it was. Because what the mind will forget, a journal can remember. It can take us back in time, like a time machine. Because as we go through our old houses that we used to live in, and we see all the marks on the walls and the growth was noted, we flip through the pages of our journal and we see everything was documented, everything was written down. We see those height marks of our soul. Contained in those pages, we have struggles and solutions, regrets and redemptions. We have the painful truth noted over time. I want to read Romans chapter 12. Not verses 1 and 2. We all know verses 1 and 2, but not a lot of us remember verse 3. Why? Because we haven't wrote it down anywhere. Verse 3 says, "For through the grace given to me, I say to each one among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think." This is a call to have a balanced view of self. Well, why is this relevant? I thought we were talking about journaling and measuring growth. In order to have a helpful examination of today, I need to have a balanced view of myself. How do I have a balanced view of myself? How do I have an accurate depiction and description of what I have done throughout the day and can capture my thoughts, how they were? I got to write it down. Sure, I can remember what happened this morning, but what about yesterday? What about last week? What about last month or year? That's why I have to write the date on every single page. This is our mark on the wall. This is our anchor in time. That way I can flip back through the date and see, okay, I have June 29th, not 2026, but 2020. How was I 6 years ago struggling with this problem? Okay. I flipped to a different page. Okay, I said a joke that upset someone. I flipped through. I watched a movie I shouldn't have. I flipped through. I served at a youth event I didn't want to go to, and I had a wonderful time. I have all of these anchors. I have all of this information about myself. Why is that important? John Calvin puts it very plainly, but very profoundly. Without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God. If I do not accurately and balancedly, it's not a word, but still stay with me, do not see myself like that, how am I going to see what God is doing in my life? If I can't recognize the good and the bad, the right and the wrong about my life, how can I see God's sovereign work in it? Because then if I don't see God, I'm just going to end up thinking what everyone else thinks. I'm a pretty good person. No, we know that. We know that we're not. No one is good. No, not one. Where did I read that before? I read it in Romans. Where? Romans 3. Oh, yeah, but which verse? 3:23. Why do I remember? Because I've written it not only on my heart, but in a journal. If I don't keep track of my life, how do I know if my life is on track? Instinctively, someone is going to respond, well, yeah, I know I'm heaven bound. I'm heaven bound, I say. But then what heavenly things have I done? I question. I know that to move forward, I cannot practice what holds me back, but how will I know what holds me back if I never slow down and check my dashboard, my surroundings? No, God, I'm going towards you. Look, my GPS, it says heaven. But I've been flooring it in a ditch and my car is not moving. But I'm too focused on the destination and the ETA that I'm not looking at the check engine light. I'm not looking at the traction control is out of the everything. I'm not looking around and seeing the mud spewing up from the tires because I'm digging myself deeper because I won't let off the gas. When we drive somewhere, especially where I live, I take similar roads because I know how they are. I know where the potholes are, where the debris is, how to practice safety. Because I remember the consequence of hitting a pothole, of getting a flat tire. And I remember the benefits of avoiding those forks in the road. But for some reason on my faith walk, I tend to forget the forks in the road. Well, maybe I shouldn't watch that movie. Why? Because now that I think about it, now that I've gone through my journal, I watched something similar a few years back. And yeah, there was a lot of hype for it. But after having left the theater, I felt empty. Okay, I have another youth event coming up. I don't really want to go, but I flipped through my journal. Oh, look, I was reluctant a few years back. And I went. I actually enjoyed it. I had a great time. I left not empty, but filled. We're always eager to stand in front of a mirror after a workout just to see the muscles pumped up a little bit more because the veins have just expanded a tiny bit and everything's a little bit bigger because we're eager to see just that much more growth. Or when we take a test, that's really important. Every day we're stressing. We can't wait. I need to see my results. I need to know how I did. But I'm reluctant to see any spiritual growth. I'm avoidant. Why? It's almost like God is knocking on my door and he's handing me a mail that says, look, I got your report card. And I'm like, I don't want to see it. Now, thankfully, God doesn't do that because we would be failing every single class. But thankfully, he doesn't do that. But I have to ask, why am I avoidant of looking at my spiritual results? Is it because I'm ashamed? Is it because I'm afraid of the outcome that I'm like, I probably am failing every class? But if I'm avoidant, if I'm ashamed, if I'm afraid, then that is proof that I know deep down I could be doing better. I know I could be doing better. Look, guys, if growth isn't measured, it goes unnoticed. You know those little cousins that you see at family reunions? And you're like, wow, you're so small. And then a few years later, you're like, whoa, you're so big. I did not see the progress. I did not see what changed day to day, week by week. I just saw the before and the after. But I missed the in between. I don't want to miss the in between of my life. If life is so precious, I don't want to just wake up one day and say, wow, I can't remember anything about me. Look, guys, we forget. Everything is fighting for our memory these days. TikTok, social media, song lyrics, movie scenes, everything is fighting to just stay in our brain. But I got to preserve my thoughts. I got to measure my growth. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, the latter half of it says, train yourself unto the purpose of godliness. Some translations say discipline yourself. Journaling is such a wonderful discipline. Yes, it's not in the Bible, like fasting and praying and serving. But I think this one is biblical. It's not in the Bible, but it's biblical. You hear what I'm saying? Because it builds discipline. It documents direction. It explains experience. A journal is like an external hard drive for my mind. You know, when we're using our computer and then all of a sudden it starts slowing down. Why? Because the storage is almost full. The memory is running out. So I have some computer buddies and I'm like, yo, guys, what do I do? You know, my computer's acting up. You probably maxed out the storage. I'm like, well, what do I do? Just get an external hard drive. It's more storage. You plug it in, put whatever documents you need on there, and you take it out. I'm like, you can do that? How often have we gone in our lives, if only I knew. Look, guys, we forget. That's why we got to write it down. We forget how we messed up. We forget how we apologized and made up. We forget that we lashed out. We forget that we calmed down. That's why we got to write it down, because we cannot learn from experience if we keep forgetting. So my friends, in order to measure growth, it is super, super simple. Buy a journal and start writing everything down. So my friends, I will leave you with this. Stay well, stay blessed. Buy a journal. Start writing in it. And Godspeed.